Good morning, everybody. How's it going? Good. My name is Chris Edson. I'm with Tenable. I lead the global solution engineering team for cloud security. I can barely see anybody out there just because these lights are blinding me. We're almost at lunch. From a speaker perspective, I think it's actually better before lunch because the last couple of sessions I've done have been after lunch. And I don't get a lot of engagement when folks have, full bellies. So thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. We're going to be talking about least privilege, all things identity access within the cloud, and understanding that least privilege is this sort of holy grail that we as a security industry have been operating against for 30 plus years now. And to truly reduce risk in the cloud, it's going to take more than just understanding least privileges, understanding identity security in the cloud. There's a couple different components to it, okay? Okay, let's get this started. So, right on time, actually. I'm not here to teach you how the cloud is different. Like, everybody in this room understands how the cloud works. But I think it is important to understand that the way the cloud operates foundationally brings about challenges for security personnel, security practitioners, because it's all just APIs. In order to deliver infrastructure, set up, Terraform delivery pipelines, you have to have some sort of permission set. And with that are phenomenal benefits to the business. That means I no longer have to open a ticket for Billy Bob to spin up a server for me anymore, right? I can simply hit an API, I can deploy out some Terraform code, CloudFormation templates, etc., and I get my infrastructure spun up immediately. But from a security standpoint, there's a lot of conditions here that we need to be afraid of or need to be wary about, right? Because developers, and no offense to any dev heads in the room, but in my experience, developers are primarily concerned with feature delivery, updates, etc., and less concerned with secure implementation of their code. So security is sort of always coming in after the fact. Trying to understand what's out there, what's being delivered, how it's configured, who has access to it, right? List goes on and on and on. Now, from a business standpoint, this is actually phenomenal. There's tons of opportunities, but on the flip of that, there's a ton of threats. So I talked about Terraform. The accessibility to the cloud has never been easier, especially with things like infrastructure as code. Everything is programmatically accessible now. Lots of teams involved, which is better because you talk about speed of delivery. Lots more folks have access to cloud infrastructure than legacy infrastructure. But again, on the flip of that, there's a ton of threats to the business that we have to understand as well. More hands in the cookie jar increases complexities. One of the things about delivering infrastructure via code is that it's highly susceptible to human error. And I don't know if anybody has ever scanned a Terraform configuration file or some sort of infrastructure as code and seen the mistakes configuration-wise. It's an easy slip. And so given that, we at Tenable believe that the only way to solve for securing challenges in the cloud is by evaluating all aspects from one approach. And that is going to be an identity-centric approach. But, again, we're going to highlight two specific areas here within this presentation. Everybody does vulnerabilities, and everybody does misconfigurations in the cloud, even if you're not a security company. You're doing CSPM. CSPM these days are a little bit sort of commoditized. But the specific things that we're going to be talking about are privilege, excess privilege, and then on the flip, so it's two halves of one coin, right? Or two sides of one coin. You have who has access to who and what can access resources and what type of resources are they? What type of data is it? And all of that is in an effort to reduce the workload on security teams. You have resource-constrained security teams that have way too many vulnerabilities to patch, way too many misconfigurations to worry about. So let's focus on the right ones. And you're leveraging the identity as the context to power that prioritization. Again, I don't need to tell anybody in this room or anybody at this conference, for that matter, that securing the cloud is incredibly challenging. There are the things that we always hear. There are too many things to assess. There are too many issues. There's too much noise. There's not enough time to do it. There's not enough people to remediate it. The teams are small. They're siloed working teams. The list goes on and on and on. Point being, securing the cloud is incredibly difficult. It's complex. New architectures and design patterns and attack vectors. Does anybody know how many services AWS started with in 2006? How much? 150. That's way higher. There was only 3 services. 3. S3, EC, which is, well, it used to be called Elastic Compute, and then SNS. Does anybody know how many services AWS has now? Over 250. So think about that from a security standpoint. Every single Reinforce and every single reInvent, there's a new service that they come out with, or that another cloud provider, 82% of organizations are going multi-cloud. So developers go to reInvent and they come back and they say, hey, we want to take advantage of this new service, or there's new AI services out there to do something for the business. And security is always like, I'm just getting a grasp of the workloads that I have running in the cloud. Now you're telling me I have to deal with SageMaker? What is SageMaker, right? So that's the sort of thing that we're contending with. It's like a hockey stick or a Nike swoosh in terms of adoption of all these different services. So you take a look at that type of complexity. It's pretty tough. Tooling overload is important too, because if you guys go to the Cloud Native Computing Foundation landscape, and or the CNCF landscape, there are hundreds of security-only vendors, for the most part, that are looking at cloud-native applications, cloud-native services, Kubernetes-based services. How are you supposed to tell, from a security standpoint, which ones you need, which ones overlap, which ones are easy to use, which one can be adopted internally? It's incredibly difficult. So you see this sort of collapse of different use cases in the form of a cloud-native application protection platform, or CNAPP. Shortage of expertise. I think everybody probably realizes this. I had a Fortune 500 CISO tell me a couple months ago that they had an identity and access management principal architect for their cloud requisition open for over 18 months. It's incredibly difficult to find the right people with the right expertise to help, cost-effectively wise, help reduce and implement security practices within your programs. There is one reason, and one reason only, that we at Tenable are so focused on identity and access management, and that is because of this stat here. According to our research, and there's other third-party research that sort of backs this up, it's within 90 to 99%. 99% of all issues in the cloud result from mismanaged entitlements or identities, period. If you're chasing vulnerabilities and you're chasing misconfigurations and you're chasing sort of the runtime stuff or the developer, the shift left focus, yes, it could be used as an initial access, but the root cause always comes back to identity. And I was joking with a CISO a few weeks ago, and he was like, security vendors are really funny because marketing comes up with all these different terms all the time, and it's like this new hot ticket item, and there's a new name and a new buzz and a new industry term, but the kill chain hasn't changed in 25, 30 years. It's still the same, right? It's initial access, it's lateral movement, it's privilege escalation, it's persistence, and then it's exfiltrate data. That's basically what it is. And if you think about that, let me go back one time. If you think about that, initial access could be a vulnerability, could be a misconfiguration, could be an identity issue. Lateral movement's identity, privilege escalation's identity, persistence is identity. Almost 4 of the 5 there, besides data exfil, are all related to identity. And it's no wonder why. No offense to AWS, but what does this slide convey? This is just one service within AWS. What does it convey? Say what? Complexity, chaos. If you expect one person or a small team of folks to understand the net effective permissions of access across the cloud using this type of service, that's impossible. You have all different types of components. You've got the IAM service. You've got resource-based policies. Oh, you disabled KMS decrypt on your IAM user? Well, guess what? KMS key policy has the decrypt for that IAM user. That's a net effective permission. You have service control policies, permissions boundaries, trust policies. You have, what's the new one they just came out with in December? Resource control policies. So that's a resource control policy at the resource level that you need to take that into account when understanding net effective permission. And oh, by the way, Azure is completely different, and so is GCP. And that's just the IAM components. Incredibly challenging stuff. All the pictures and memes and whatnot that I have in this presentation are all literally from LinkedIn. Because I love LinkedIn because I just think lots of security folks, practitioners, et cetera, are all up to date in terms of the things that they're sharing and the concepts they're sharing. And while some of them may be funny, they are all mostly true. Saw this one the other day, especially within the cloud. Obviously, you're going to have a web application firewall for your application, your critical applications. But for the most part, with the way that folks are adopting SaaS-based tools, identity is going to be your perimeter, right? You can have the best network edge on the planet and leave an unused credential or API key somewhere, and all of that network edge is for naught because it has excessive permissions or has access to a service. And then on the flip side, I like to make fun of vendors because we all say identity is the new perimeter, but it is kind of funny because it is true, especially in the cloud. And these are just a list of specific examples of how you manage identity and access, all the different controls, and it's probably not even exhaustive. Gets back to the complexity piece. Given that you need to understand identity and access management, and how does that context enhance or decrease risk within the cloud, but you have to deal with all this stuff. And then you got to deal with your identity provider federating access into the cloud. It's like we have a researcher at Tenable. We have a dedicated research team. It's over 150 people that just look at vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, and issues within the cloud, legacy infrastructures. And he calls it he actually discovered a vulnerability within Google Cloud. He calls that sort of example the Jenga tower of access. Because, to their credit, cloud service provider, does one thing, there's an API, then they're like, we need to do something else. They have to build on top of it, and then they build on top of that, and they build on top of that, and they build on top of that, and one little piece, and the whole tower falls down. And just more examples of, I said 99%, but it's really hard to find an example of a breach that doesn't, at some portion of the kill chain, involve an identity. Where if that identity was mapped to least privilege or removed, access was removed, that the breach could have at least been eliminated or reduced from a blast radius standpoint. The one that's probably the most recent is the Oracle with the weak access credentials, which I don't know if Oracle's still denying or not, but it happened. And then Midnight Blizzard. We'll talk a little bit about that next. That was one that persisted for quite some time because they had an OAuth application that they created based off of inactive credentials and were able to exfiltrate data. And actually, just coming from Tenable, given that we have, the best vulnerability database, over 200,000 vulnerability checks now. We were one of the first that come out with Log4j check. Password spraying to find Actually, yeah, password spraying, it was a different one. So it was a Onus incident, which is like a crypto market that leveraged the Log4j vulnerability. It's just another example. That ended up getting into a API key, AWS credentials, had access to S3 bucket, full access, exfiltrated data, and then deleted all the buckets. Midnight Blizzard, again, going after the shortest point between A and B is straight line, right? Like I'm going to go after inactive accounts. I'm going to go after unused accounts. I'm going to go after excessive permissions. That's exactly what they did here. And just some more data points, right? Like there's this TechStrong survey which asks security leaders what are the biggest security threats to your cloud environment, and the top 2 responses are identity focused. Identity-related breaches and excessive permissions. CISA came out with an advisory last year. It said, threat actors are changing the way they gain initial access by simply going after inactive and unused accounts. Because it's that easy. So, besides the complexity slides that I threw up there for you to convey chaos, why is this such an issue? It's probably self-explanatory at this point, but we can talk about some of the pillars that we see in terms of why it's an issue. Poor visibility. Poor visibility is pretty self-explanatory. And I'll talk a little bit about identity sprawl because it's kind of commingled here. But poor visibility, we don't have the right tools that are integrated into the right identity services that can present a relationship-focused or identity-focused view on risk. Not to mention with the way that identities change, we are either delayed or coming in way after the fact with the current configuration of who has access to what and what can be done with that access. Identity sprawl is really interesting. Microsoft came out with a report last summer. I think it was last summer. Whoa. And they said the ratio of human to service accounts is 1 to 10. So for every human user, you got 10 more service accounts to deal with. Service accounts, while they are a little bit more predictable, they are identities. They do have access to workloads. They have access to services. They can do things. They can change things within the environment. And they are most likely excessively permissive. We talked about complexity. Again, 75 to 82% of all organizations are going multi-cloud. So that complexity just builds on top of each other once you get into different paradigms of access across multi-cloud environment. Contextualization. So you need context to drive that execution or remediation. Imagine if you were like, hey, developer guy, or site reliability guy, this role is overly permissive, and you need to reduce the privileges. And he's like, well, what's overly permissive? What happens if I reduce those permissions to the application that it's dependent upon, or some other service downstream that it's dependent upon? And the security guy's like, I have no idea. So you need to understand the context of how that identity relates to everything else running within the cloud. Are there vulnerabilities? What are the misconfigurations? What are the configurations? What is it mapped to? What is it related to? What is that identity supposed to be doing? We lack confidence as an industry on the context of identity and access management within the cloud. And then we've talked about insufficient expertise. It's just incredibly difficult to find the right folks to be able to manage this stuff at scale and across a multi-cloud environment. I saw this on LinkedIn last week. Kevin Page is the CISO at Conductor One, super smart guy. I know there's some missing context here, so I'm going to sort of quote it out for you. So basically he says, quote, least privilege is great. In theory, it sounds great. But in today's environments with SaaS, IaaS, PaaS, on-prem, and zero standardization across identity or access patterns, it is a fantasy. Worse, it creates a distraction. Teams get so focused on achieving zero or least privilege that they make decisions that slow down the business and actually increase risk, end quote. And his sort of, what he's postulating here is that zero standing privileges and access just in time when they need it is the way forward. Do folks generally agree with this? Hands? Okay. So I also agree with it with two caveats. Least privilege is not very good for human users. I think everybody in this room can probably agree with that. It's too dynamic. I have way too many changes in the environment. The time that I implement least privilege for this person, their needs change the next week. It's impossible to keep up with. So you need least privilege for at least service identities, because those are way more repeatable, predictable access levels. And then the second caveat here is just in time, in my opinion, is not a feature, functionality, capability. Yes, while there are vendors, including Tenable, that has a just-in-time feature, functionality, capability, it's way more than that. You always have three things. You got people, process / policy, and then technology. So the technology is covered. You need the people, the process piece to actually be successful in implementing. We just implemented 13,000 developer just-in-time at a very large financial organization, and we had to get buy-in at the very top to start implementing a just-in-time sort of culture across the organization. It needs a phenomenal user experience, and the engineers, because typically it's not cloud security or security practitioners requesting access here, it's developers, it's site reliability, it's cloud architects. They need to come to you and say, I love actually doing just-in-time. It makes me feel better because it's easy to use. It makes me feel better because there's a security sort of condition to it. It's reviewed, it's audited, it's very quick. It doesn't get in my way of doing anything. It's immediate. I get approval right away, or I get auto-approved. It's got to be super easy to use. And these are the two components that we're dealing with, right? Service identity sort of includes that non-human identity aspect, your API keys, those types of things. API keys typically have some sort of, permission policy associated with it. Again, service accounts are consistent. They're more predictable. They're much more aligned to right-sizing permission sets for cloud access, for different workloads, services that need access. Human identities, again, impossible, unpredictable, hard to right-size, and even sometimes, I don't know about you folks, but I've been in a situation where I've wanted to rip my hair out because somebody comes to me and says, I need access to XYZ service within AWS. Okay? I just assigned a policy to you. You're good to go. Actually, it's not working. I'm getting a 403. Okay. Well, let me check again. Let me add some conditions or remove some conditions. Okay, it should be working. Still getting a 403, access denied. And then you start to think about that complexity slide. What component or variable is in line of access that's reducing my net effective permission to not allow the person asking, the requester, access to the service? It's incredibly difficult and frustrating. So then I just go, you know what? Have admin. I'll remove it later. And later never happens. So the recommendation here is to leverage least privilege for service accounts, non-human identities, but do it on historically used activity. You need to be able to. That's the important thing. Like when you look at a just-in-time or an IGA provider, they're not really built for the cloud. They're built for identity, but they're not really built for the cloud, so you miss all that context of maybe historical access. And then for human users, gotta jump on the just-in-time hype train. Okay. So let's take a look at how this sort of solution works. And we're at booth, I think it's 617, if you guys want to actually see it in person. I even have like a little recording here that I'll show you as well. Again, we manage short-term permissions for the cloud. This is a multi-cloud as well as SaaS-based applications. So it's really cool because the user experience is so fire that people have asked us to implement for other things beyond cloud infrastructure because the adoption has been increasing so significantly. Okay, the top sort of person icon here is the requester. Pretend that's somebody coming in and saying, I need access to do some maintenance on an RDS instance, relational database service, right? So they sign in through their IDP. 99% of organizations federate through an IDP. And they have access immediately to AWS or another cloud, right? But they don't have access to RDS because they are no standing access by default, right? That would be the goal. So through Slack or through Teams or some sort of other medium of chat ops, they say, hey, I need access to this relational database eligibility. That is notifying our second person icon at the bottom, which is our approver user. They say, approve that request. Tenable Cloud Security manages just-in-time permissions within the multi-cloud or SaaS-based environment through IDP group management. All the notifications, downstream integrations, all that stuff is integrated through email, Slack, Teams, etc. And then the original requester, assuming approved, has access for that period of time, and then it's immediately revoked once the original time has elapsed. So if they request it for 2 hours, we remove the eligibility. Okay, and so here's a quick little overview. Let's see if my iMovie skills are put to the test. Okay, the requesting user has no standing privileges to AWS, as you can see here. Now we're an admin creating a DynamoDB read-only eligibility that people can request and approve. We're picking the user who can request this. Anybody in the engineering team. We support groups. Which policy can they request? AWS read-only, or DynamoDB read-only. What accounts can they request? And who's approving? Oh, the site reliability engineering team. No justification required, although I have it as optional. Great, eligibility is done. In Slack, the requesting user, again, seamlessly integrated into their workflow. Selects what eligibility they want, which accounts they want, how long they want it, and they give a justification. That's been sent to the approver. Now let's pop over to the approver. Let's approve that in line with what our daily operations look like without having to log into the console. And now we have access as the requester to DynamoDB service. Everything else is access denied except for DynamoDB. Maybe 2 hours went by. The approver says, I accidentally approved it. I'm going to go into the request and revoke their requests. And within a matter of seconds, the requester refreshes, and you get an error. No more access. That's what I'm talking about when it's more than just technology. It's process. Has to be easy. Has to be seamless. It has to integrate into... If you cause any strife or any extension of a request, you're going to get pushback from a security standpoint, from the business. And this isn't just me or Tenable saying this. If you go to the Identity Security Alliance, you're going to be given these pillars. Here's how you implement best practice for access within the cloud. And we do all of these pretty phenomenally, if I might add. And while they technically say implementing a just-in-time program is under the advanced and less of a beginner intermediate, I think it's something you really got to start baking into the organization early on. You've got to start changing the culture to zero standing privileges by default with access just in time. Again, it's a journey, so not everybody's going to get there right away, but you got to start laying the sort of the red carpet out for just in time. Okay. So we've talked about excessive privileges. We've talked about unused access in general, of course. We've talked about implementing just in time. Least privilege, when it makes sense for non-human or service accounts. But there's something missing in this equation. And it's important because, especially in the cloud, everything is connected because it's just all APIs, right? So when you look at how access sort of leads to maybe sensitive information or resources or data or different services, it's all APIs. That's what makes implementing cloud security from an identity-first approach that much more important. Because even if you have a private bucket that is configured appropriately, you can still get from a vulnerability or a misconfiguration to a role that has privilege to that specific sensitive information that can then exfiltrate data. So you might be okay on the misconfiguration side, but you're not okay potentially on the access side. That's why it's important. So thinking about access, right sizing, least privilege, just in time, can anyone think or shout out what we think the missing piece to this equation is? Yes. Yes. Sure. So, yes, I would say that's still in the same domain as identity and access management. And when you look at implementing just in time, you need to have multiple layers of approval. Yeah, absolutely. Because depending on the eligibility, it could be a higher sensitive environment, right? And you might need 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different people to review that and audit that approval request. But talking about a different domain outside of identity and access management, anyone else have an idea? Say it? I can't hear you. Role-based access. That's still in identity and access management. Identity and access management is the main piece of the equation. I'll give it to you guys. Data. Data. Here's data. Data security. Why? Well, because almost every single breach, while it does include identity, they're removing or exfiltrating data as part of that kill chain. Almost every single one. Securing data is incredibly complicated. It's everywhere. There's different storage mediums, there's different services, there's different technologies. It's incredibly difficult to find what type of data is out there, who has access to it, and how it's configured, and what the risks are associated with it. Again, data breaches are still an issue. It is incredibly difficult to figure out if there are active threats or preventative threats to your data because you don't understand what type of data is out there. And current solutions are, historically, if you look at data security solutions, there's some really good ones that are historically looking at data. The problem with that is, with this sort of adoption into cloud, especially within the artificial intelligence sort of era here, they are not purpose-built for cloud. And vice versa, cloud security solutions are not purpose-built for data. So there's this sort of gap when you look at how can we understand the full equation of identity and access management and what type of data they're trying to access. Artificial intelligence complicates this, right? This is from a report from Thales. It's the Thales Data Threat Report 2025. It just came out recently. In the era of AI, data security takes center stage. Obviously, that's probably self-explanatory, right? AI is powered by data. Organizations are racing to build their own models and pulling in data and leveraging data. So according to that report, 1 in 3 organizations are already integrating and transforming their operations with Gen AI. And security, unfortunately, for us, is always behind the curve. We're coming in after the fact. It's the wild, wild west. Business demands will always lead. Security is going to follow. And security leaders are mostly concerned with data integrity and trustworthiness. So if the data is powering business through artificial intelligence, are we confident that we're protecting the integrity of the data that's powering those different models and those different services that we're creating for our customers? It's always been the same sort of issue, but AI is pouring sort of gasoline on that fire and making it way worse. And then you have quantum computing, and I promise this all sort of makes sense here. It's all from that initial data security report. I had a CISO tell me, I'm not even joking you, I'm not worried about my data security because it's all encrypted. Okay, well, quantum computing is going to decrypt your data in like a matter of seconds or minutes, right? Like, that's the goal. So are you confident that your data is identified, classified, inventory, protected before you have to rely on encryption as your last secure resort? So what is it? How does it relate to access and privilege? Again, they're two sides of a single coin: identity and access management and data security. Who has access to what, and what can be done with the access? What type of data are they accessing? You need to shore up data in line with shoring up identity and access management. Ask yourself, where is the data? What is the data? Is it sensitive? Is it confidential? Is it restricted? Is it non-sensitive? Who has access to it? Who uses the data? That's your identity and access component. That's probably a really important piece. And how can we actually reduce the risk? What are the configurations or rights or access or at least privileges that we can implement to help reduce a blast radius of accessing this data, secure or not? Okay, let's talk about how. And again, back to the same sort of common theme. Identity-centric approach to securing your cloud includes understanding access and understanding what type of data is out there. Start with discovering. Figure out where it lives, connect the dots. You can't protect what you can't see, right? That's pretty straightforward. Start to classify it. You need to know what type of data is out there, because if you are worried about prioritizing, protecting Tracy's and accounting favorite song list from Spotify, then you're probably not worried about the right type of data in your environment. Understand access. And again, this is the important part, right? Because you're starting to blend the lines in terms of access, identity management, and data security. Start to identify risks. Now, this is more than just excessive permissions. This is the sort of reducing the security gaps or threats around that data, like misconfigurations and vulnerabilities and all the different sort of variables that go into initial access or downstream access. And then again, we've talked about context. Context is the piece that I think is so important because, again, nobody in this room needs any more alerts. So we need to leverage our ability to pull in additional context, primarily around access, to make sure we're reducing and understanding where we should remediate and spend remediation efforts. And if we circle back to this slide from earlier, this is our sort of charter. From a Tenable cloud security perspective, we're reducing risk in the cloud by focusing first on, anybody? Identity, yes. And the net effective permissions across the cloud while discovering, inventorying, classifying data in the cloud. And so we look at it, removing excessive permissions, locking down the data, reducing exposure, all in an effort to reduce workload. If you're taking that sort of vantage perspective or vantage point, the amount of vulnerabilities you have to fix and the amount of misconfigurations goes way down. Yes, you're going to have reds and oranges and stuff like that on your dashboard, sure. But it's not going to carry risk to it, or if the risk is carrying with it, is going to be significantly lower than making sure that you're spending time on the right things. One of my favorite things, I like to talk about outcomes. we are probably going to be, when you guys go to the Expo Center, we're going to be talking about features and functionality and green buttons and blue buttons and this and that and sharing and PDFs and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to actual outcomes, these are specific things that I ask my customers to think about. Like, how confident are you that you can review every single entitlement for every single user and every single identity for every single resource across a multi-cloud environment? I never, ever get a hand. Never. Because it's hard. I mean, it's impossible, and people are not confident with the tools that they already have that they can actually do that. And we just talked about 99% of all issues in the cloud result from that kind of thing. Are you confident that you know every single this sort of supply chain era? Are you confident that you know of every single third-party access to your cloud environment, what they're doing, and what type of data they have access to? And then, of course, I mean, a couple other things here about protecting data. Can you inventory? Can you classify? Can you figure out what's out there? What type of data is related to access? What's the risk associated with it? Can you answer those questions? Okay, so you guys are going to get a couple minutes back in your day because there's no way I'm going to take up the full hour. But to leave you with just a few recommendations here, and this is not going to be anything new. This is going to be the same sort of thing that I've been talking about the whole talk here. Start with identity first, built for the cloud. I say built for the cloud because when you look at legacy IGA providers, it's total square peg, round hole, right? You're just kind of mushing things together. You need to have expertise in understanding access to the cloud because it's a completely different paradigm than it is for legacy solutions. So start with identity first. Get on board this just-in-time hype train. The only thing stopping implementing just-in-time, or at least adopting it, again, is people and policy within the organization. If the solution is a world-class user experience, it integrates seamlessly, people like to use it, there's no reason why every organization shouldn't have at least had the conversation to implement just-in-time program. We did it here at Tenable for our internal security. So everything that I request access to as an employee, I open up Slack, assuming it has some sort of security component to it, like I can get into my HR systems, no problem, without just-in-time. I open up Slack, because that's what we use for our chat ops. I hit /Tenable legit. I ask for requests, gets approved, and I'm immediately within the application or the cloud infrastructure. And finally, data is your sort of key prioritization component here. So all things being equal, when you look at the kill chain, if you have the same vulnerability and the same misconfiguration and the same access problem, but again, one leads to your favorite Spotify playlist and another leads to sensitive patient records. If you're not looking at data, then you might treat those two kill chains or issues as the same in terms of prioritization. But if you're looking at the data as another variable, then you understand that one needs to be treated a lot higher than the other. So again, my name is Chris Edson. Find me on LinkedIn, Global Solutions Architect Leader here at Tenable, focused on cloud security. We're doing a really cool custom hat bar at Tenable. We have a huge booth. It's like a 30 by 30, right sort of at the entrance and exit within the expo. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, criticisms, whatever you want, if you want to talk about identity in the cloud, come talk to us, come meet me. It's a pleasure. I hope you guys have a great time in Philadelphia and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.